Coco Chanel. Fashion is not just about dresses. Fashion is something in the air. Fashion is in the sky, the street. Fashion is about ideas, the way we live, what is happening. Coco Chanel. At the start of the 20th century, the idea of women in business seemed crazy. In those days, men held all the positions of power and made all the decisions about money. They believed that a woman's place was in the home, looking after her children, cooking for her family, and managing the house. If a woman needed to work, she could perhaps find a job in a shop or in a factory, but she had no chance of working as a businesswoman or a banker or a lawyer. Women's fashions in the US and Europe at that time supported this idea of their position in society. Fashionable women wore long dresses that almost touched the ground. This made it difficult for them to drive a car, ride a horse, or even walk quickly. As a result, they needed men to arrange their travel for them. A fashionable woman was also expected to keep her skin as white as possible, to show that she didn't work outside in the sun. This meant that women spent a lot of time indoors. When they went out, they often wore large hats that were decorated with flowers, leaves, and fruit. These protected their faces from the sun and made it even more difficult for them to move around. But many women weren't happy with their position in society, and they didn't like the clothes they had to wear either. One of these people was a French woman called Gabrielle Coco Chanel. When she went into business in 1910, she planned to change the clothes that women wore. But over the next 60 years, she did much more than that, as she became the richest and most successful businesswoman of the century. Coco Chanel had no experience of business when she opened her first hat shop in Paris in 1910. She was only 27 years old, and she came from an ordinary family. When she left school, she worked for a dressmaker for a short time. Later, she tried to become a singer in a nightclub, where she was given the name Coco. Coco was an attractive young woman. She always dressed well, and she was good at making friends. Although she didn't have any money, she mixed with fashionable, successful people, and her boyfriends were often rich young army officers. One of these was a handsome young Englishman with a big black moustache called Boy Capel. When Coco asked him to lend her some money so she could open a shop, he was surprised. He had never heard of a woman in business before, but he liked the idea. "A woman in business?" he said. "That sounds fun. How much do you want?" Coco asked for enough money to open a shop in one of the best streets in Paris. "No problem," replied Boy Capel. He was so rich that he didn't care if he never got his money back. Many of Coco's customers in her first shop were her rich young women friends. They loved the simple but beautiful hats that Coco made for them. At parties, they laughed at other women who still wore hats that were covered in fruit and flowers. Soon they were asking Coco for clothes that were designed in the same simple way. Coco hated the long dresses that fashionable women wore, and so she was happy to make dresses and skirts that were much shorter and reached just below the knee. She also persuaded her customers to wear loose jackets and blouses that allowed them to breathe more easily. Again, the rich, fashionable young women of Paris loved Coco's new ideas, and her shop started to do well. In 1913, Coco asked Boy Capel for more money because she wanted to open a second shop, this time in the French seaside town of Deauville. In summer, the streets of Deauville were full of fashionable people from all over Europe, Russian princesses mixed with English ladies and the daughters of German businessmen, and they were all looking for clothes in the latest style. After her success in Paris, Coco was sure she could offer all of them something special. She was right. The young women in Deauville loved her simple hats, loose jackets, and skirts and dresses that reached just below the knee. Coco made plenty of money in her first year in Deauville, and in her second summer she expected to do even better. But then, for everyone in Europe, everything went wrong.